Hello and welcome to episode 21. We will be covering the while loop and probably the for loop, but we'll start with the while loop, and you can enunciate the H as hard as you want. So first we're just going to set x variable to 1 here, and just as a little refresher, we're going to say, well, x is less than, and we'll just say 6, and we want it to execute something, and we just want it to print the number that is x. And remember that if we were to execute this right now, we will have an infinite loop because we are not incrementing x, so we're not adding to it. So x will always be less than 6, so we'll just keep running. So how we solve that is by adding this plus equal 1, and then that will increment it as I've shown in the past, and we will execute this and show it again. So we get 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 as our output as x is incremented by the while loop. And it's only executing while it's less than 6. So once this equals 6, it does not execute the print x block. So it does run the evaluation. It fails the evaluation. It's not less than 6. That's false. And once it gets the false Boolean back, it does not execute anything within the while loop. Now I did say that there's an infinite loop here. There is a way around that. You can use a break statement if you want. So you could do something like the current block we have, and then we could nest an if conditional, right? We could say if it equals 4, let's say, break. And until it equals 4, let's increment. We have to move this incrementing block here past this break statement. So this way it will check the conditional, it will print x. If x equals 4, it will break. Otherwise, we will increment x plus 1. So go ahead, save that, and run it. And you see that our loop stops at 4. Another thing we have is the continue statement, and the continue statement will stop the current iteration and continue with the next. So we can do something very similar to what we have here, except we're going to flip the order around a little bit. So instead of break, we're going to do continue. We are going to take this, the incrementing value, cut it out, put it first, and then we're going to move the print statement to the bottom. So we will save there, and we will run that. So now you see that it increments first before it prints, so 1 becomes 2 before it prints. And then once x equals 4, it skips everything after continue. So what it does is it won't print, it will just skip that one time, and it just continues back up to the while loop. So once it's 4, it just throws it back up here. And since it wasn't told to print before, it doesn't print it ever. So to kind of illustrate this, I will put a second print block in here, and you'll just see that it will double up on everything but 4. So let me stretch the console out a little bit, and you can see right here we have 2 2s, 2 3s, and only 1 4, and 2 of everything else. So go ahead, delete that. So just remember, continue just throws it back up to the top of the loop, and you want that in a conditional 2, or else you could just get a non-stop loop also that's maybe not executing anything you want it to. Okay, we're also going to cover the else statement, which you can do with a while statement. So I am going to cut this for now, move it down here, and we're going to write that while statement that we had before with x being less than 6. And while it's less than 6, we want to print x, and we want to add 1 to x to avoid the infinite loop. And then we will add this x is no longer greater than 6. And then we add this else statement. So notice this is not nested. So since it's not nested, it will run this conditional. If this condition is not met, it will go on to the else, which we've seen before. And then we just run 21.py, and we see that it runs through the 5 iterations until x is incremented to 6, and then it prints that x is no longer greater than 6. And this is not an infinite loop. Else, we'll just execute this the one time that it's called, because it doesn't meet this, so it doesn't bounce back up to the while loop to reiterate. And that covers while loops, and we'll move on to for loops. If you want, there are exercises for while loops as well on w3schools.com. Okay, for loops are used for iterating over a sequence. That could be anything, like a list, a tuple, a dictionary, a set, or a string. So any of those things that we want to pass in as a sequence, we can iterate over it. So we'll just demonstrate with the list. We'll make our awesome 1, 2, 3 list, and I forget the square brackets for a list. 1. So we have our little list cranked out here, and then we just want to do for num in x, and we will print num. Save, execute, and you see we iterate over it, which this might just be a refresher for you, but if you're not familiar with this, feel free to practice until it makes sense. And a for loop doesn't require that we set any index, so we're not telling it, hey, start at index 0 and then index plus equals 1. We don't have to do that in the for loop. It automatically takes care of it. So we can also just loop through a string here. So we can do I'm a string, and char would be more appropriate here. Although string would be more appropriate maybe in the other one. That's okay. So you see that it prints out each character in the string as it iterates through. So that's why it's not in line anymore. It's just doing the single character. Okay, just like in while loops, we're able to use the break statement to break out of it. So we'll just leave this called char just for simplicity's sake, and we will pass in x here, the list of x, and then we're going to check. So we'll do a conditional here, and we'll see if char that we're printing equals 2, then we want to break. So notice that it's nested. This conditional is nested inside the for loop. As we iterate, we'll see if it's equal to 2, and we run pi, and you see that we get 1, 2, then it breaks and does not iterate over 3. So that is how you can use the break keyword with a conditional. You can also exit the loop when char is 2, but this time the break would come before the print. So if we do that in this order, like we could move the print down here, paste it there, run it, and you see that we only get the first iteration. Because it breaks the loop here with the conditional, it never goes on to the print. It just stops the loop entirely and moves on. And just like with while loops, we also have continue. So we can do that, and we'll see what that output's like. And you see that we get 1 and 3. So remember, continue just jumps you back up to the loop, and it ignores everything that comes after it. So it never hits this print of char, which is a poorly named variable for this instance. But that is how the continue statement works. And then we've done this one before, but just remember that you can do a for loop where it's something like for x in range, and we can pass in a number. And remember, it won't be the characters like 0 through 6. It will just do 6 total starting with 0. So we save, and we see 6 characters here, 6 numbers, and it stops at 5. And we can do the range. Remember, we can do something like 2 and 6, save, print, we get through 2 and 6. So one other way you can use the range function is that you can increment the sequence with a third argument, something different than ones. So we could say 50 here, and we could do it by 3s. So we'll go from 2 to 50 by 3s. And you can see how that output looks. So if we do 51 here, I think we'll get one more output, and we do. So you can also do like an else statement at the end of this, so we can just go back and do like range of 10, print x, else, print And we see we get it to iterate up, and then we get it to print the message that we want when it's finished. And we'll actually lower that to 5 so it's just less painful. So the else block will not be executed if a loop is stopped by a break statement. So if we have something here where we say if x equals, let's say 4 break, and then we're printing x, and you can also do break inline if you want. If you want to make it look neat, you can put it up here. We're not going to do that though, just to keep it readable for everyone. And then you see we get 0, 1, 2, 3, and then it breaks out of the entire for loop, so it doesn't even pass it on to the else, because the else is part of a for loop. So I've built 2 lists, and I'm going to show you how you can nest for loops. With for loops, you want to avoid nesting them as much as possible. They are very bad for performance, but sometimes it's necessary. So we'll go over how you do that. And early on, it might seem like a easy way to kind of fix something, but try not to do it. So for this, we will do for s in x, s for string, and then we will nest this loop. So instead of doing the execution right here, we're actually executing another for loop. And here we will do num in y. We will do it just as in. And then we just want to print s and in. And this will show it. So why would you do that? Sometimes you'll do it if you want to build like a grid in a video game or something. For loops work for that. Like think of kind of like a Jeopardy board or something. So you can see the values we're getting back here. So we're getting the first element at index 0 of x and the first element of y. But then this loop keeps running. So we stay on the first element of x here, and we're iterating over y. So we're bouncing from 1 to 2 to 3, the values 1 to 2 to 3, or 0, 1, 2 indexes, while still being on index 0 in x. Then after y is completely done iterating over it, this will increment once, and it goes up to 2. Then y repeats, 2, 1, 2, 3, and then once y again is done iterating, then this increments one more time. Because remember, for a for loop to increment, everything inside of it has to be done. So for this to be done, it has to print this first. And as it prints this, it increments the number here, the index that it's looking for, and prints it. So if any of that's confusing, don't worry, you'll get practice with it, and you can just keep practicing with it until it does make sense, or you can ask me a question, leave a comment, whatever works for you. And we'll just finish up talking about the pass statement. So just like in the previous example of it, we could have for x in range 5, and then it can't be empty, right? If we save this, we try to run it, we're going to get an error. And again, it's the indentation error because it expects something here. So Python, it's first checking for indentation before it checks to see if you have anything else. So it's seeing that there's no indented block after this for statement, so it's passing that error. So if we use pass and then we rerun it, we're fine. Obviously we don't get anything, but we don't get an error either.